Hello, hello, hello. We've got our first guest here. Um, People will be joining as the call goes on. Everyone, thank you for joining our narrator call. I have some narrators that I'm very, very excited to catch up with. And we planned this a long time ago, and I've had you all on my list. So I've had my eyes on you. So I'm glad to have you all here today. Um, you know the drill. If you have questions, put them in the chat box, but I'm going to be sending the chat. We usually on these three-person calls don't have a lot of time to include audience questions, but I will send them your chat after the call if there is any. So I would like to start off with, I happen to have Tim up on my screen right now. So we're going to start off with Tim, and I'd like to know, first of all, about 10-year-old Tim.
Oh Lord, you're asking about. I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning for crying out loud, let alone
I'm going to
10-year-old.
bring you down memory lane. As a little boy, what were you excited about? What were you living for? What were you, a future planner, a daydreamer, a nerd, or what
I
were you
was I
doing?
was a I was a daydreamer, very much more in the moment. I was not a big planner, but that was when I was 10 years old was when I had first discovered performing uh,
Oh,
in a couple of ways. One was I had in elementary school, I don't remember exactly how all this happened, but I knew this silly little song, and the teacher in my classroom at that time asked me to get up in front of the classroom and sing it. And I just went nuts with it. I mimed the whole thing and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um,
so you weren't shy.
no, no, I didn't. I've had people ask me, how do you get, I've never had a problem with getting up in front of people and speaking in front of microphones. Like some people will freeze, I don't. And it's just, I've told people I don't have an issue with getting up in front of people and making a fool of myself, because we all do it sooner or later. But
Yeah.
yeah, I did that little song, and then I had a cousin who he bequeathed me his coronet, and I started taking lessons with that, and really, really, really got into music.
Is that
Uh,
like a flute?
Coronet is kind of like a small trumpet.
Okay.
It's
Oh, I
it's
bet
a
your
brass.
parents
Yeah, it's a
weren't happy
brass.
about that.
Yeah. I didn't practice as much as I should have, um, but yeah, that's what got me started in performance. And as far as getting into audiobooks, I've always been an avid reader, so it was kind of like put it together and make it go. Um,
Okay, but don't go too far because we're still sticking to 10 years old. What about
right.
high school? What about how did you get along with other kids? Were you
Well, I was
keeping
one of the
yourself?
geeks. I was one of the geeks on the outside. There was the when I went to high school, there was all the jocks, and then there was all the everybody else, and then there was a
Yeah.
subset of everybody else, all of us musicians. I sang in the choirs, I played in the bands, I played in the orchestras. So we had
Where
our own little
where was
sub
this? Where did you grow up?
little suburb outside of Detroit in Michigan called Dearborn.
Oh, I love that. That sounds like the idyllic American childhood.
Well, it was the classic, um, exactly how, almost a Leave It to Beaver type household.
I
And
love that. I really, okay, now I'm going to leave you here, Tim, if that's
okay,
okay with you, and we're going to join you later on your journey. And I would like to pull up, I'm just going to go left to right here. So I'm going to grab Steve. Steve, if you can please come up on camera, cough or
Hello, hello.
something.
How are you
Hi,
doing?
Steve. Okay, 10-year-old Steve. Where were you?
Yes.
Where were you growing up? What were you doing?
I was in a tiny, dinky little town in northern BC, Canada, called Dawson Creek. It is known
Called Dawson Creek?
Dawson Creek, not to be confused with the TV show Dawson's Creek, where Dawson is the main character and he has a creek to buy his house or something. Dawson Creek was a small town in northern BC and is famous for being the mile zero post, or the mile zero of the Alaska highway that travels from all the way up into Alaska.
Oh,
So
very cool.
that's where I mean, it was supposed to be a tourist attraction, but we just felt like our town was just dirty and awful. Nobody liked it in Dawson. That's
Did,
not true. There are people get offended that live in Dawson. My folks would get so upset when I'm like, Dawson is like the seventh ring of hell. And they're like, no, it's not. It's amazing. And I'm like, yeah, I've lived there. It's not. It's not all it's cracked up to be.
yeah, I'm from Fresno, California. I get it. We were the joke in every LA show. I go to Fresno.
Yeah.
So, okay. So happy childhood, extrovert, introvert.
You know, it's ironic because at 10 years old, my mom had just remarried, and they'd been married for about 2 years and I got my next baby brother. So it was my mom's fourth child, the last that she had. She was 38 at the time, and there was 18 years difference between my oldest brother and my youngest brother from my mom. And so there was 4 of us boys that she had. And so that was a kind of a tumultuous time, not so much because of that, but I mean, there was a whole new dynamic of living with a stepdad that we'd never known. He's very disciplinarian, and you work and you work. That was about it. There was, he talked about there being time for play, but time for play was not really in his vocabulary. And
Did you feel angry as well? See, I think I'd feel angry. I'd be like, who are you in my house telling me what to do?
well, we moved into his house, so I mean, it was
Ooh.
his house, his rules kind of thing. Him and I butted heads a lot. Um, I'm I'm the type of person that I can't be quiet if I see injustice or I see someone being wrong in their assertions or whatever. So if I felt like I was being unjustly accused, or if I felt like I was not given a fair shake, you knew about it. My teachers were very familiar with me, and I got in many arguments and many discussions. And ironically enough, I won a lot of them, which is crazy for a kid to be winning arguments with their teacher. But
I like that.
for him, he doesn't like to lose, and he needs to be right. He had a lot of issues that he brought into his marriage with my mom. And so there was a lot of challenges, and I would butt heads with them. Whereas my brothers were very non-confrontational. And so they would just kowtow to him a lot and would, what's the right word for it? They would make excuses. They would, just try like, well, like this not, and they would try and like defend themselves, which just got him more upset and more irate. Whereas I would come back at him with reasons why this wasn't right or this wasn't correct. And we would, at one point, I don't know, how far do you want me to go? Because that was into my teenage years.
Well, I do. Well, I know I don't want to go too far forward, but I do have a question. Do
Yeah.
you think that that early upbringing in that situation, I can only imagine, do you think it sparked a determination and a kind of like a stubbornness in you that is actually benefiting you in your current career? Because those attributes, the way you got on then, I can see as a freelancer being actually positive.
It was in a lot of ways. I was bullied pretty heavily. We were super poor even after my mom remarried. Before that, we were crazy poor. Like we had to save up to be poor, kind of poor. And that we got teased and mocked a lot, of course, when you're young and you're showing up with the Sally Ann, as we called it, the Sally Ann clothes, and I would beg my mom, please, please, at least buy my underwear new. I don't want used underwear, just please. And so we didn't have a lot at all. We had next to
Yeah.
nothing. And then when we moved out to 180 acre, I want to call it a farm or a ranch because it had animals, but it was not a functioning one that way. And we lived in a 75-foot mobile home trailer that was fueled by a at the time like a 40-something-year-old diesel furnace that would constantly break down. And you're in northern British Columbia, where it was very common for it to get to minus 35, minus 40 degrees, and the furnace would break and we would have no heat. So there would be ice on the mirror in my bedroom when we would wake up. And my mom would open up the stove to try and heat up the house just by turning on the stove and having the oven open. And we would all kind of huddle around that because it was so cold. And then because it was a mobile home and we had lots of mice out on the farm, they had made nests in all of the insulation that was underneath the mobile home, pulling it away from the pipes. So the pipes would freeze and then we would have no water. So for sometimes 2 weeks, we would have no water in the home and we would have to use a 5-gallon pail bucket in the bathroom. And every Sunday was the cleaning day where we would go out with 2-liter pitchers of juice pitchers and scoop up snow and melt snow on the stove so that we had enough water in a really large basin that we could have like this sort of communal bath where we would just kind of share that water in a washcloth and wash ourselves down. So it was.
So 10 years old it was like survival. I mean, you were having to live a life at a level at 10 years old that most people don't have to do until they're fully formed. Okay. Now
our water was out of a scoop out. For those who are familiar with what that is, it's basically where the snow melts and runs downhill, and then you literally just scoop out a hole in the ground and it fills with the water, and then we would pump that into our house. But scoop outs need to be continually scooped out because that's just sitting water, and he hadn't scooped it out in over 30 years. So you would put your hand just about an inch or two under the water and you couldn't see your hand anymore. It was so brown. And at one point, the live leeches were actually coming out in the bathwater, and we would try and drink milk, or we would drink juice, and my dad would be like, "Why are you drinking so much milk and juice? It's expensive. Just drink the water." And we're like, "The water's disgusting. It tastes horrible." "No, it's fine. I drink it all the time." Well, he didn't. He would have coffee, and he liked cowboy coffee, as he called it, where his version of it is if you threw a horseshoe into the pot and it stood upright, the coffee was ready. So yeah, he claims that he would drink the water, but he wouldn't drink the water. And so it was pretty bad. And it was while my mom was pregnant. We had that for a couple of years. He changed the water finally because my mom threatened to leave him if he didn't get the water fixed because it was a danger to us. So he eventually got the water changed over. So we got town water hauled in. But the freezing, that lasted well into after I moved. So it was
so all of high school and your childhood was pretty raw.
Well, I mean, we didn't know any better. Like that we were still kind of doing okay there for a lot of that stuff. And I didn't know until years later when I had conversations with my friends that knew me growing up and we're now married and we have kids of our own and we're reminiscing, and they were like, "Oh yeah, it was only because of the love of your mom that my parents didn't call child services on you." Like,
you see your life through someone else's eyes. But it's the resilience. I think that's a protective power children have.
Mm-hmm.
You can go through the worst things, but you still have the joy of being a child.
Yeah.
And it's
and my mom was amazing. And so she loved us and we never felt like we weren't loved. Whereas a lot of people that are in that situation, they have parents who don't care at all. But my mom was just in a hard situation where she was trying to make the best of a bad situation of what was going on. And because of her past histories with failed relationships, was determined to show us that you can survive, like you should be married and then stay married. And so she stayed married to a guy that maybe she shouldn't have stayed married to for a long time because she didn't want us to feel like she was just running from one guy to another guy to another guy. So.
Okay, now normally this is the moment I move to the next. I'm going to leave you here.
Yep.
We're going to pick up at a different part of the journey. But thank you very much, Steve. Suzie? Can I please pull you up on stage?
Hi.
Hello. I am really interested to hear about 10-year-old Suzie because Suzie now astonishes me with climbing mountains and doing fish traps and driving buses in precarious I'm a girl that's terrified of the snow. Like I cannot walk to work in the city if there's ice on the road because I'm so scared. So
Oh.
we're opposite, and I'm in awe of people like you. Can you please tell me of 10-year-old Suzie, about 10-year-old Suzie? Where were you growing up? What was life like?
Well, first I have to say that, Steve, I have driven several times through Dawson Creek on the way to
Oh,
Alaska, you know,
you
or on
guys
the
are
way out of
neighbors.
Alaska. Yes, we're neighbors, practically neighbors. I think, you know, when I was listening to Steve, I thought, you know, I think we were poor too, because, but you know, when you're 10, you don't really know. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
you're just playing, you know, and fighting with your sister, and I mean, you're just, life goes on, and you're not thinking, you know, how many times are we going to have pork chops? You know, you're not thinking that. It so at 10, I was the youngest of 4, and my dad was a truck driver, and I I was 4 years younger than my sister, so I pretty much played by myself. And my brother, he was 2 years older than me, and he had the tolerance of he just didn't. I mean, he was a boy, you know. So I mostly played by myself, and I danced with the mop out on the patio and sang
Oh.
and sang and sang. And the neighbor one time hollered over, "Would you ask your mother if you were vaccinated with a phonograph needle?" So I did do a lot of singing. And singing was something that our family did. When we would go to visit my grandmother, who was only 12 miles away, all 4 of us would sing. My mom would start a song, and we would all sing different parts. And it just was something that I grew up doing. I think she did it to keep us from fighting, actually, you know, whacking each other in the back seat. Not that
Yeah.
ever happened. But, and I think I was mostly in my own world, you know, just
Living in the moment then, not thinking
yeah,
about the future, living in the moment.
playing with my dolls and starting to read, you know, fun books, you know, Misty of Shinatag. And, you know, I was quite a reader, you know, so, you know, between singing with my family, which was sort of a learning, but slash comforting anchoring kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And when we would start to drive longer trips, like to the beach or something like that, I think my mother had a list in her head. Okay, we're going to the musicals now, you know, or okay, we're going to church now. So we would start singing all these
I
different
love
songs.
that. I bet you inherited an ear for it then. If there's music in your family, did you
Oh,
inherit?
definitely. Like she
Yeah.
would say, "Okay, John, you're going to sing bass. Steve, tenor, Sharon, alto, Susie, you sing melody with me, unless you can't do it, because I know you can sing you can sing harmony. So whatever you feel like doing." I kind of filled in the gaps, you know, or like if it got too high, "Susie, you need to take soprano because I can't reach those notes." So I would be the one who was going from up. I really did. I think because I was the youngest, I could hear all the parts that the other family was doing. My father
That's a
couldn't
gift.
hold a tune in a bucket. In fact, when he would start to sing, we would go, "Just drive, Dad. Just drive."
Yeah, I would be your father.
He would hum. He would hum. And that was enough.
Okay. I've got to thank you so much, Susie. I'm going to leave you here, if that's okay. And I'm going to please ask Tim to come back.
I'm back.
Okay, Tim. So you've been doing it all. You've been singing, you've been dancing, you've been playing not the clarinet. What is it? The
Cornet, I've played
cornet.
just about every brass instrument out there.
Okay, so you've definitely got an ear for music as well. And we've gotten you through high school. we've gotten you where you're now at the age where you've got to make decisions. You've got to go to college. You've got to choose what you're going to do with your life, or not go to college, or get a job, and there's the inevitable moment where you jump out into the world and the world pushes back, and you first realize that maybe things aren't what you always thought they were. Did you have that moment, or did you have a moment where you thought, hold on a minute, I've got to make a choice here, or where you made a choice yourself? At what moment did you run into life, and how did you handle it? Was it in college, not college, later?
Well, it was later because when I went to college for the first time, I was bound and determined that I was going to make a living as a musician. I went to get a four-year college, and I got a bachelor's degree in performance on classical organ.
Wow.
And and then after college, discovered that this is really difficult to make a living at. Well, plus, it was, I'm dating myself here. This was back in the late 60s, early 70s. And, so I joined all kinds of bands, bar bands, and got off into that life as well, and had this idea that, I could make a living as a musician and party all the time if I wanted to. And,
I was
reality,
gonna say, I suddenly had a
that
picture of
reality
Tim.
hit pretty hard. Um, so when it came down to it, I've always had an aptitude for computers. And my sister was working at a computer company at the time, and she recommended me. And I remember my first job in computer support. Um, I was designing data and switching systems for what was then called Ameritech. This was right after
Wow.
Bell
And you
breakup.
enjoyed that? You liked doing that? That's
Oh
a big
yeah.
leap from the creative brain to
Well, there
that.
was still a lot of creativity that went on in it, and
Yeah.
a lot of because I remember that my supervisor heard that I was kind of knew my way around computers, and one day she said, "Come into my office." I'm like, "Okay, what the hell do I do now?" And there's a big box sitting in the corner with with IBM on the side of it, and she said, "Tim, this is an IBM personal computer. And by the end of the week, I want you to make it do this, 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 this." And so I took the box and opened it up and just went with it. Um, so it was, but all the time, all of this was going on, I was still had my performance going on in the background.
I was
Uh,
going to ask, were you feeling like you were leaving your music behind? Was there a disappointment, or were you still trying to juggle them both so
no,
you
I
could?
was juggling them both. I did, come to the realization that making a living as a musician was probably not in my future, but I wasn't going to give it up either.
Yeah.
I still, and to this day, I still sing in choirs and play. In fact, next week we start rehearsals with a local community group for the musical Titanic. I play in the pit orchestra for these people, and so yeah, that part of performance I don't give up.
Okay, so you're working away at computers. You found a way, so that's like paying your rent, your mortgage, and everything. And did you ever encounter a time in your life where there was a challenge and you had to question yourself and change?
Oh boy. All right, we're going to go down a dark hole here.
Dark is fine. We've all been to dark, and we see each other in our dark
Okay.
moments.
Well, a lot of people get upset when I tell them this, but I don't have a problem admitting it. I'm alcoholic. If I don't do anything really stupid, later this month I will have 18 years of sobriety.
Oh,
And
that's congratulations.
thank you.
That's congratulations.
But yeah, that's when I got into the whole, because I had married, we had three kids, and I just kept drinking through a lot of stuff and kept getting away with it. So I figured, well, if I can get away with it, just keep doing it. And I did until I couldn't get away with it. And I've spent time in jail. My then wife had sense enough to divorce me. I got fired from my job. Um, but that's when, reality really hit.
But you
And
see, you say dark, but when somebody tells me a story like this, suddenly I'm there with you. Suddenly I'm like, wow. Do you know what I mean? Because when you've been through things like that, it forms who you are. It's like how we get our wrinkles and we get our scars. Suddenly I'm interested. Do you know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
not that I wasn't interested before. You want to hear everyone's happy stories and everything, but I want to hear how we've all been brave and come through it. That's a lot to go through and to face, and then to sit up and you're on the other side,
Yeah,
right?
and there's still to this day a lot of things that I regret, a lot of things that I'm still dealing with. Not,
Yeah.
not having to drink, but there's a lot of people I hurt in the past. A lot of amends that I still need to make to some of my kids, um, and numerous other people. But, I just keep working it, as they say in the fellowship, one day at a time. Um, but, that was not an easy time in my life. And that's when things got real. When when you find yourself sitting in a cell in jail, and
Scary.
going through alcohol withdrawal, and the other people in the jail cell are watching you,
Yeah.
it dawns on you that, wait a minute, this isn't how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But fortunately, um, joined AA, and I'm still active in AA.
How long was it an epiphany moment? That's it, no more? Or was it a gradual getting better and
It
finding
was
a
a
way?
it was a gradual, because a couple of times when I first, there was a court program that I was offered the opportunity after I got my second DUI. Um, I could either go into this program or go into jail for 90 days. And this program, it was called sobriety court. And you had to go to an AA meeting every day. That was part of a number of things you had to do. So even then, for a while, I'd go to meetings, and then right after the meeting, I'd go out and get drunk. Alcoholism is funny. Not funny, haha, but funny, oh my God.
But
Um,
it's the things we lean on, and then the minute chemicals in your body, because I mean, I know this doesn't compare because there's another level with alcohol. But when I was younger, I used to go to AA meeting, Overeaters Anonymous meetings.
mhm.
And my friends and I would go, determined to change our lives. And then we would listen to these people and we would meditate. And then we would go out and we would binge eat. And then all the diet clubs do that as well. You go and you get your weigh-in day, and then you go have a big cheat meal because you don't get weighed again until the next week, so you can get away with it. It's like a trick your mind plays because it wants to hold on to the crutch, doesn't it?
Yep.
Your mind doesn't want to let go.
Yeah, well,
So
it's one thing people don't realize about alcoholics. And, it's being proven more now on a biological level. But, I was taught, and I've experienced this, that as an alcoholic, once I put alcohol in my body, I lose complete control as to whether or not I'm going to drink again. I don't have a
yeah,
choice.
yeah.
So, for me, abstinence is, the way I have to go with it. And it's not like, I can now walk down the liquor aisle in the store and not drool. It's
Yeah.
just not part of my life anymore. And I don't ever see it coming back that way. But yeah, that was a complete change of life. And
That's
oddly
conquering
enough,
of demons. That's conquering demons at the highest level. That
and
takes some serious strength, doesn't it?
yep. And oddly enough, that's what was how I got into radio newscasting. because,
okay. I'm going to stop you here
okay,
because that's our next part of the
all right,
journey.
we'll pick that.
Yeah.
Stay
So I'm
tuned.
going to leave you in this, you come out the other end. So it's not a bleak moment. You've taken control, and I will leave you and we will see you in a few moments. And I'm going to grab Steve, please.
Wow.
Steve?
Wow. That's
Okay.
that's
We
crazy.
left you already experiencing a difficult time. So you know that the audience and I are sitting here rooting for you, hoping it, because this question is, when did you come up against life and face a challenge, and then how did you overcome it? But it sounds like you'd started off with the challenges. Did it get easier or did it get harder? At what point did you take control?
You know, it got a bit of both. Um, it got a bit of both, easier and harder. When I was, like I said, I was bullied a lot, and I had a lot of temper issues, a lot of rage issues, a lot of challenges with that. And so I was not well liked, and people used to try and pick on me because they would get a big reaction, and nothing makes kids happier than getting a big reaction. And so they would try and get me to react and explode. And then I would explode and I would be the one in trouble, even though I didn't instigate it. And I think that's where a lot of my sense of injustice and frustration with that came into play.
I love that you were a fighter, though. I love the fighters of this world. I do. I do. I love the kids that stand up and get pissed off. I
Mm.
love that. Okay, so you're fighting
You
back.
wouldn't have loved it if it was your kid that I threw into a door or into a wall or
If my kid was a
whatever. But
bully, actually, I probably would.
so, but there was something that changed. We had a big tragedy that happened at this. I went to a private school. We talked about the private school stuff when I was on your podcast the last time, so I won't get
Yeah.
into a whole bunch of that. But
Yeah.
there was a major accident that happened with the basketball team, and the whole school was about basketball, and it ended up making a school split. And then that transitioned because a lot of those bullies and all those people that I knew went to the other school, and so we stayed. And from there I was sort of able to garner a group of friends around myself, and we had some transitions with some of the leadership at the school and church, because it was a Christian school that I went to, that really kind of tried to foster me in a lot of ways, which in some ways was very toxic and very bad for me, but in other ways really helped develop me and help me figure out. And that's when I discovered drama, was because I was so aggressive and I was so competitive that while I was in phys ed, I was, unbeknownst to me, I felt like, no, I'm not doing anything, but I'm sure looking back that I was hurting other kids with my aggressiveness. I would kick the ball too hard and it would hit them and it would hurt really bad, or I would be shoving
Okay,
it,
so
whatever
at
it
this
was.
point, it's becoming like a thing.
Right.
It's becoming a problem.
And because the school I went to was kindergarten to grade 12, they just took me out of the elementary portion where, it was like the kindergartens to grade 5, grade 6, and then moved me into the junior high portion, and which was like grade 7 to grade 12 of phys ed. Because it was such a small school, they would put those groups together.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
When they would tell you, don't do this, you can't do this, what did you think to yourself?
I would think it wasn't fair. I would think, why am I the one getting in trouble when they started it?
Okay. Yeah.
I'm just trying
Fair
to defend
enough.
myself. And so what that facilitated, though, was because I had to change to the junior high gym, and of course we only had one phys ed gym, so they were at different times. It meant that I could no longer, my time when my peers were going to phys ed, I didn't have anything to go to. And when I was in phys ed, what we were supposed to be doing was being done with my other peers. So they switched it. So now I'm doing drama with all the kids that are like 3+ years older than I am. And so now I get to act. And that opened up a whole different world for me that I just was like, oh. So I loved it. And I was in all the plays and loved doing all of that kind of stuff. And that transferred all the way in through high school, where my drama teacher, my grade 12 year, cried as she was giving me the Fine Arts Award, which I had won the Fine Arts Award from, I think, grade 5 onward every year consecutively. And then in my grade 12 year, she cried as she was giving it to me. And she admitted to me later on, we had done 2 short one-act plays that year. And one was a scene from Les Miserables with Jean Valjean and the Bishop's Candlesticks. And then the other one was this sort of a Princess Bride type, Princess and the Woodcutter type thing. And she gave me the lead in both. So I had to play Jean Valjean at his most criminal, dastardly, like animalistic portion, and then do a quick change to playing this charming woodcutter like Wesley from Princess Bride, like that. And then I had been
Good
rehearsing,
training for
we've been working at it
audiobooks.
really hard. Yeah, sorry?
Good training for audiobooks.
Yeah. And then we've been working at it. And then when we did dress rehearsal, one of the leaders, the principal, I'm not sure who, went to the drama teacher and said, he's cursing in the Les Miserables. He's saying some things that aren't appropriate for this school thing, so you need to change his lines. And she was panicking. She's like, you need to change these lines. I'm so sorry. You've been working at this, and now I'm changing everything the night of opening night. Is that okay? And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And I went with it. And so she said, I did all of that, giving you both of those lead roles because I was determined to try and find something to challenge you, because everything just seemed to come so easily to me with that. And it drove my teachers nuts. And it still am heavily, back then we were just finding out about ADHD and how that affects people, but no one around me thought ADHD was a thing. I didn't think ADHD was a thing at all, but I very, very clearly had ADHD.
Because you were doing the
And
hyper focus, weren't you?
right. And so I was excelling in certain things, but I couldn't keep it consistent. And so I would have moments of amazing and awesomeness if you could get me engaged and interested. And then the rest of it was just miserable failure. And so my school academia was a bit of a mess. And so when it came time for like graduation and then looking towards what am I going to do with my life? Of course, I grew up in the church, so I was going to be in ministry. I was going to do youth groups and be a youth pastor or whatever, sure. But nobody tried to like talk to me about what your career is really going to look like. How are you going to accomplish these things? Because from my grandma and beyond, all the way down, like to my mom and my aunts and my uncles and everybody, no one had graduated high school in our family. I had a couple of cousins that I sort of knew, but not really, that had graduated. But my older brother had been expelled. My mom had a grade 9 education. My uncles had like grade 3 educations. My aunt had a grade 5 education. Like there was just, so that was the stress, was graduate high school, get a diploma, just get a diploma. And then there was no talk about what do you do after that? What do you do once you graduate high school? Where do you go?
Yeah, the system, I just did a book on the educational, they're doing some educational things in Anaheim, and I found myself very jealous of students now, because people are taking into account an actual life path, because I had immense pressure. I assumed to be a doctor, a lawyer, go to the best schools. And when I got out of high school with really good grades, there was no money. And my mother would never, you're not allowed to do credit cards or go into any debt or take any loans. It still boggles my mind. So like, how did you expect me to pay for these really expensive schools?
Yeah.
It's like our parents can only help us at the level they know, right? And
yeah.
So if you don't have somebody with an example or the right path, you can flounder and
Absolutely.
get lost.
Yeah.
But so did you get depressed at that point?
No. So when we were talking earlier, you asked about resiliency. And I think that's where my life leading up to that point, and I didn't recognize it at the time, of course, but I just would take failure after failure and be like, okay, well, that didn't work. I'll try something else. Because I had grown up in in an environment, not just with my stepdad, but with people in the church, leadership in the church, other people. And not to say that I didn't have good people loving me, but it was always focused on your faults and putting you down and berating you for what you're doing wrong, never about encouraging you in what could be right, or giving you grace for that kind of stuff. My mom was amazing at giving grace, unbelievable. But the rest of the world, the rest of my world, was not very good at that with me. And so I had to learn, I internalized that I was garbage and I wasn't good at anything. And I would just have to try and do my best and then fail, do my best and then fail, do my best and then fail. And I feel like that. And yet, ironically enough, I had other parents during my high school career that in grade 11, I had just on a whim said, I want to be student council president. Well, you're not allowed to be student council president when you're in grade 11. It's only for the grade 12s. Didn't bother me. I was like, I'm going to try out anyway. And I had one teacher say, you're not allowed. And I'm like, okay, are you going to stop me? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep going. And I ended up winning to be student council president in grade 11. And then won so many awards that year that it was kind of a joke that I was being obnoxious with it. Because, I mean, ADHD, you're obnoxious all the time. And I would be sitting down and they would call my name up for another award. And I'd be like, oh, okay. And I would get up and do another award. And parents got mad, I found out later, and were like berating the teaching staff for like, what are you doing giving one kid like all of the awards? Spread them out. And they're like, do you think that the award should go to the most deserving student or not? So what happened? And so that it was weird because I was constantly failing and being told I was a failure. But at the same time, I was trying to prove people wrong that I wasn't a failure. And
but also
then,
every failure was a stepping stone to success, because
right.
failure is the route to success.
Right. It's you learn more
Yeah.
from failing than you do from succeeding.
Yeah.
And so I just kept plugging away. And so when it came to, I got out of school and I was like, I don't know what to do. And I had a friend that was just like, well, why don't you come down to Calgary and you can go to seminary down here and work part-time. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll do that. So I did that, went to seminary, but had no ability to do schooling whatsoever. And it was awful. And I disagreed with my instructors and I had challenge after challenge. My teachers in high school, I had one that came up to me and said, we have meetings as teachers specifically about you. And I'm like, what? And they're like, we don't know how to deal with you. And I'm like, what do you mean? In what way? Because I thought that we got along really well. And they said, well,
I thought we were friends.
right. And but I mean, it was kind of a weird, scary compliment, because what they were saying, what they confessed to me was that teachers are supposed to control the classroom, right? They keep the temperature, they create the atmosphere, they are the ones that are in charge. And they said, when you're in the classroom, every teacher says this, when you're in the classroom, you're the one that dictates whether we get anything done that day or not. If we can get you engaged, then the whole class is with us. We have everybody. But if we can't get you, we don't get anybody. It doesn't matter. You are the one that dictates whether anyone learns, whether anybody is engaged or we getting the attention of anyone. You have that kind of power over people. And they were telling me, like, this is something you need to be aware of, and it's very scary. And I was like, wow, that is crazy.
What I love about you is that you've taken every single hardship and lesson and embraced it so that it molds you. And it's become your superpower. Your otherness has become your superpower, not something you apologize for. And no, but I love that. And I think, and that's a struggle I've had most of my life. And I've learned to mask really, really well. And it happens to a lot of people that are other. They learn to get along and then they wake up one day pissed off.
Right.
And I think, in a way, because you didn't learn to fake it, you're not going to have that day of disappointment where you go, crap, what happened to the last 90 years? Okay, now I'm going to leave you on this note, and I'm going to join you again at the penultimate part of the journey. I never know if I'm using that word correctly. And I'm going to please call Suzie up. Thank you very much, Steve. And also there's some interesting conversation. Thank you, Josh. I'm not going to read your message aloud just because it seems personal. I don't know if you want me to, but I'm going to send you guys the chat after the call so you can read what Josh said. It's quite interesting. Oh, Josh says I can read it. So from Tim's talk, Josh says, I know about the alcoholic life from a child perspective. I watched my dad die because of drinking. It's been about 4 years. He was only around 63 years old. So yeah, that really, and it's what we said before the call. For every single one of our journeys, there's going to be somebody watching this YouTube video that has experienced it, the same journey. And I think that's what I love about these calls the most, the one with the 3 narrators, because as you feel, you make me feel seen when you talk, Steve, because I relate to things that you say. Josh relates to Tim's story. Susie's a mountain woman. I wish I could relate to that. But okay, Suzie.
We'll get to that part.
Tell me about a part of your life where you faced a challenge, where you faced that moment, that ultimate, I'm going to
The
change.
ultimate as an
Yeah,
adult or as
yeah.
before I was an adult?
I think it happens at a different time for everyone. Sometimes it's when you get out of high school. Let's start with sometime after high school, when things stopped being a happy, kind of oblivious, I feel cradled by the world ride. And it's like, Tim, I'm not going to make money as a musician. I have to do computers kind of thing.
I was raised in a very conservative Christian home, so I get where Steve has been. Prairie Bible Institute, maybe. I didn't go there, but my son did. But anyway, I came to Alaska from Oregon to work in a Bible camp because that was acceptable. And that was probably a key word for my life. You do what is acceptable so that you feel good about yourself and you don't disappoint people. I was always,
Wow.
don't disappoint anybody, because my mom nailed that into us. Don't be
Yeah.
a disappointment. She literally would say, don't be a disappointment to me.
Did you never want to rebel when you were young?
She just didn't know about it.
Oh, not get caught.
It was more attitude than what I actually did. But
Yeah.
and I really wanted to be in the drama. I took drama in high school, but they would do parties where the police were unwelcome visitors, and that was just a bridge too far for me. So I couldn't really socialize because it was just way too far out for me. And of course I would disappoint my mother. So when I graduated from high school, I went to Alaska to work at a Bible camp because that was so acceptable. So I did, and I was a cook, and that worked. And then I thought, oh, looked to me like the counselors were having a heck of a lot more fun than I was slaving away in the kitchen. So I decided that I would go back and be a counselor. Well, they said, because I happened to be the only one who did know how to paddle a canoe, and I had curly hair, that I could survive in the wilderness and still look good. So that was actually a thing they told me. And I was the one gal, and there were 3 guys, because you had to haul a lot of canoes and hike and do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So,
misogyny is still healthy and kicking.
well, there were also more boy campers and fewer girls. So I took care of the 3 girl campers, and the guys took care of the remainder. So I did that, and that was quite a challenge. Rock climbing, all that kind of stuff. Ice climbing, canoeing, everything, all that.
We
And
were not
then,
scared. You're not scared of that stuff. I'm terrified of that stuff. Like, was it just because you were raised doing it when you were little? Is it because of your environment, or?
Probably. It was,
Yeah.
we went on lots and lots of hikes and camping and all kinds of stuff. And it was more familiar to me by far than if I were to have gone to a city. So this was like, you know, sure, I'll do that, you know, so I did. And then I fell in love with the camp director and we got married and then we had
That's actually
kids.
quite romantic. You
Well, and
married the
we
boss.
lived off the grid, no power, no road. We had to paddle a canoe to get to our house. So, and we didn't have any money.
Yeah,
And
less
so
romantic.
then we built a log home, which was a lot of work. And we did that. And then we had 2 kids. Took a while. That was a bit of a challenge. Was it? It was fun, but it took a challenge.
But so
So
how were you feeling about your life at this point? Were you like just, it sounds like you were still kind of like living day by day.
still pleasing people. And then we decided it really was smarter for us to homeschool our kids. And everybody else is like, oh, this is great. And I was like, 1 or 2 days is good. But from kindergarten through high school, every single day, I struggled.
And was it your husband homeschooling as well?
Not much. It was mostly me. When I got to algebra, he took over because I didn't do algebra real well. So, but I did all the rest. And, you know, there were fun days and all that kind of stuff. But it was the daily part of it that was just, it was probably one of my darker times in my life because I was like, you know, that, is this all there is?
What about my
Just
life?
waking up, make
Yeah.
breakfast, teach school, you know, make dinner, go to bed, you know, read the stories, do the whole thing. And I was like, other people are like so spiritual about this. It's like, I love doing this. And it's like, I should love this because you tell me I should love this, but I don't. And I was, you know, every single day I struggled with it. And my husband knew that I was struggling with it. But the only other option was a school that was close by that was, you know, anywhere between 25 to 45 kids, K through 12. And it was mass chaos at the school. So it was like, and we even went and visited. You know, it's like, okay, well, let's do this. We can go, we can use this school. And it was just like, even my kids said, Mom, you can teach us more than that. It's like, but it was just like, it was like no end. Like, this is 12 years. Well, 14 because of, you know, the one coming after.
God.
And it was dark. It was dark and it was hard. It was like, I would go for a walk just sobbing and thinking, you have 2 wonderful kids. You get this opportunity and you're
Yeah,
bitching about it.
Yeah, but you see, that's an evil trick society plays on us.
That you're
If they want
supposed to
put us
like
in a
something.
role.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it doesn't help that there's always those people out there doing it and acting like it's the easiest, best thing on earth. But if it's not where you belong, it's just like having kids. I didn't want kids. And there are all these people out there acting like it's and I'm not putting them down. That's lovely. Their kids are nice, great, wonderful. I will give them ice cream if they come over. I love them. But I didn't want kids. I felt sick to my stomach at the thought of it. And
I just shared mine.
yeah, see, that's the thing. But people don't understand that. And you get a lot of pressure if you try to not live the lives that people want to easily so while during this time when you're taking these walks, were you telling yourself, okay, I have 4 years left and I'm going to do this when this is over? Or could you not think that far in the future? Did you feel hopeless about it?
I think at some point I did realize that I had to do something only for myself. You know, I was singing at church and I mean, it was all great, you know, it was a yeah. But that wasn't for me. That was, I don't know, it was for other people. And so I started looking into watercolor painting.
Oh,
And I
that.
started I had a friend who was an artist and I would go to her house 60 miles away because everything was far away. The nearest grocery store was 50 miles away. across the lake, or whatever
Yeah.
to get there first. And so then I started doing watercolor painting, and I checked out the librarian, and I became very good friends, which is 25 miles away. And I checked out every book on watercolor. And then I started going to workshops, like down in Washington. And I would just absorb it. And it was just like, it was just, I don't even think I enjoyed it for, the final product. It was more just, I could shut out everything and just do that.
Yeah.
And then after a while, I started teaching, and I had my art in galleries all over the state. And then I
Which
got
is
tired of
amazing. How
that.
did it feel the first time you booked a gallery? How did that feel?
It was a little painful because they wanted half, and I'd already spent that money on framing. so I didn't make very much money at it. So-
But
so,
did you feel like this is the beginning of something? I've climbed my way out of the morass.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I
And
think
you
that
did
was,
it on your own.
yeah,
Like
and
just
it didn't define me, but it made me something other than a homeschool mom. It just,
yeah.
it's not that it gave me value. It was more that it helped me to see. It helped me to get out of my schoolwork and into, I would go out and sketch. And I could let the boys go along with me, or I would go by myself. You're on your own.
But
I would go.
but if you think about the key to it, it's not that it helped you see, it's that you did it. That has
Yeah.
got to have given you that showing yourself. I think that the moments that we back ourselves, like they feed our soul, but you showed yourself that you're looking after yourself, that you've got grit, and you showed yourself.
Yeah, I think that I had to choose something, though. If I hadn't done that, I don't know what else I would have chosen, but it had to be something that was totally me, and it didn't involve anybody else. I didn't need somebody else to fire my clay. I mean, it was me. And it could be small, it could be big, and it just sort of gave me something else to look at that wasn't homeschooling. So.
I love that. I love that. And you made a success of it as well. A series.
And actually, I do apply what I learned in art to audiobook narrating.
It's a perfect segue. Okay, I'm going to leave you on this part of the path.
Leave me on my little stool.
Yes, and I'm going to pick up with Tim, and I've got a 3-barrel question for each of you, and we'll wrap the call up with it. So, 3-barrel question. Your very first book that you recorded that got put up, publicly published somewhere, anywhere, or the very first book that you did, how did you feel? Like, was there a I'm a narrator moment? Was there a I made this happen moment? And then I'd like to know the highlight of doing this kind of work and the low moment of doing this kind of work. Start with the low. Let's end on the high. And a quick word of advice for people that are going to be watching this in 90, 100 years. So, 3-part question. How did you feel the very, very first time you recorded an audiobook? What was the lowest point? It can be how you felt. It doesn't have to be a physical thing or a tangible thing, but the lowest point, the highest point, and a word of advice for people watching.
Well, the first audiobook I recorded, because I had, after all of the fun stuff I did with music and computers and whatnot, I eventually wound up on radio because after I lost all my jobs and my marriage, etc., etc., I've had this happen any number of times. It still happens every once in a while. But, go into a store or gas station talking to the clerk and they look at me and go, "Are you on radio?"
I
You
love
really ought to
that.
be on radio.
Because you've got a great radio voice too, by the way.
I've been told this before. And so I figured, well, why not? Let's try for it. So I went to a trade school called the Specs Howard School of Media Arts and graduated from there. I interned at a station down in Detroit and then moved for a couple of years out to uh, a station in Morgantown, West Virginia, and then got an opportunity to move back to Michigan at another station. So I took that. But I had started in investigating doing voiceover work for like commercials and oh, the guy who you hear talking and when you're on hold on the phone and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But then I started hearing about audiobooks were starting to get real popular, and this is just when Audible was just getting started.
Wow.
So I was like, oh, let's give it a shot. And the first book, I still can't believe I even got this thing, considering my voice. It's a book was called The Light of Supramasia. And I won't go into the plot and everything, but let's just put it this way. It's a young adult book, a fantasy book, told first person from the point of view of a 14-year-old girl
Yeah,
with my
we've
voice.
all had, have you ever, that's a kind of book and you're like, are you sure that you
Yeah,
meant to reach out to me? There-
yep. So, and that was a lot of fun, but and most of what I've done so far is I've done some fiction, but most nonfiction because of,
But
I'm good
how
at
did
it.
it feel when you got that first book? Were you
Well, I was
nervous?
I was gobsmacked. It was just like, yeah, just like you said, are you sure? Do you know who you're talking to here?
What
But
about the lowest moment? Did you have any of that? Oh God, will I ever work again? Oh God, it's a dry spell. Any moments like
well,
that?
that comes and goes. I think that's part of the business, to be
Yeah.
honest. Um, I just went through a dry spell, and it was like, I'll just keep banging away at it. And then in the last 2 days, I got 2 contracts. So
So you
you
don't
know,
internalize it too
no, I
much.
try not to because, and I'm not sure about anybody else, but it's always second guessing, like, how am I doing? Is the performance wrong? If I got the text, did I put too much compression? There's any number of things that could be, um, the reason you didn't get picked for a given book.
Yeah.
I forget who it was. I think it was Sean Pratt that told me this because I took Sean's course as well. But I think he told me, when you get rejected, it could be because your voice sounds like the author's ex-husband who she really
Yeah.
hates.
Sean
You know,
told me
so
that.
so just keep banging at it. That's all I can do.
What
And
about
so
your favorite book, your highlight?
I don't know if I have an absolute favorite because there's things I like about almost everything I've done.
Yeah.
Uh, some of them, like some of the educational things, they're real easy, quick reads, and I can make them sound what I think is halfway decent. And then there's other things like the one that I just started working on here yesterday, as a matter of fact, where I'm having to learn. It's called Tales from Israel, and it's a biographical historical thing about Israel being founded. I'm having to learn how to speak Hebrew in a lot
Yeah,
of
that's,
instances. So that it's a challenge, but I like the challenge on it too.
yeah.
So I don't know if there's any one favorite book that I can really point to, um, and it's not not trying to brag here, but well, like I said at the beginning, I can't remember what I had for lunch, and
But
this
actually, I think I could learn a lesson from you because there's something to be said for, I like them all. They're all nice. There's something to be said for a steady regard for my job. Whereas me, the over dramatizing kind of gets old. This is the best thing I've ever done in my entire life. Oh my God. I mean, it's getting a little bit tiresome. So I think I'm going to channel a little bit of Tim. I
Well,
enjoy
part of the way
everything you do.
part of the way I look at it too is if I decide there's something that is my favorite, that means I like the others less.
Yeah, good point.
And and I don't. I like them all. I love doing this.
Okay,
You know.
Tim, if you could leave the audience with one thing, take away one thing from this conversation that you wish people would remember or keep in mind, piece of advice, words of wisdom, what would you like to tell them?
Oh, first off, caveated, if you're looking at me for words of wisdom, you're in trouble. But
You seem very wise to me.
but it's like one of my favorite quotes from President Calvin Coolidge about persistence. You know, persistence is, he says,
Okay, now we
know,
hold on, Tim.
persistence
I
is
don't.
what will get you where you need to go. Education,
I'm going to stop you for a second. I don't know if you can hear me, but your computer screen is freezing up. Weirdly, uncanny
hello?
timing. The moment you started to say the wisest words, you completely froze. So, and you're still frozen. So I'm going to pull Steve up, and then I'm going to pull you up at the very, oh, are you back?
Okay.
Okay, say something. You're back. You're back. Okay,
I'm
what was
here.
it? Persistence, what?
Okay, I'm back. I'm back.
You're back.
He
What were
says,
you saying about persistence?
it's, that's what really counts because education is, the world is full of educated derelicts.
Yeah,
So persistence and love of what you do is what's going to, really make a difference.
I love
So,
that.
if I've got to give words of wisdom to somebody is, if it's in your heart, don't give up.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you for joining this call. I can't, this was amazing. So thank you so, so much. Yeah, this combination of guests, I think, is going to speak to so many people. So thank you very much, Tim. Steve?
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Okay, very first book, that moment, how you felt when you got that very first book. Highlight of your career in audiobooks, particularly. Low light first, highlight, and then final words of wisdom.
Well, first book is kind of a confusing thing because when I really started to look into being an audiobook narrator and then had the go ahead from my wife that yes, you can pursue this, I wanted to get started in it right away, but realized the kind of the thing that people were using to get into it really early was ACX, which at the time wasn't available to Canadians. And so I didn't have an option. Now, I wrote them a letter, and I'm not going to say that my letter got Canadians the ability to be on ACX, but about
I'm not going to
3
say
months,
it didn't.
3 months after I wrote them the letter, Canadians were allowed to be on ACX. So
Yay.
draw your own conclusions. It was a very memorable letter. I called them sexist. So I'm not kidding you. I wrote a really crazy letter to them. I keep it on file because it was, yeah, I really tried to get it passed around the office was my mentality so that it got a lot of eyes. But what happened there was because I was interested in that, I was already taking lessons from Sean Pratt. I was taking engineering lessons from Don Barnes, and I had a friend who was sort of like a second mom who had written a few books that she had published. And I told her that this is what I wanted to do. And she said, well, for practice, what you could do is one of my books. Narrate one of my books. We'll put it out there and you can have that as like your, practice to try and make it work. And I was like, oh, great. Well, it was an allegorical fantasy that was 15 hours long, had multiple characters that went over the span of 30 years. So the characters that you met at the beginning were like 8 years old, and then by the end were grown men and women. And so I had to age them as I progressed through the story. And we met them at like 8 and 10 and
Jumped
15
in at the deep
and then
end.
20 and whatever. And then also had all of the, like a section where there was 5 women all talking to each other in conversation. And I'm like, how? I got like maybe one girl voice if I'm lucky. How do I do like, so yeah, definitely don't recommend doing a 15-hour allegorical fantasy. Not the best idea. But it gave me a lot of practice. What I want to say my first book was because I had everything prepped and ready to go, taking coaching from Sean Pratt. When I got the email announcing that ACX was open to Canadians, I had everything ready to copy and paste into my new ACX profile. So I put all this stuff in. I had my demos ready to go. I had my resume of whatever, everything that I've been working on with Sean, and I put it up there on ACX. And within, and then I went to work in construction at my job. And on break, I opened up my phone to kind of like, see what was going on. And I had a couple of emails. And
how did it feel?
Within
How did it feel when you saw those emails?
Oh man, I was elated because within 2 hours of me posting my profile on ACX, I had 2 offers, one from a small independent publisher and one from an independent author who were like, we want you to do your book. They weren't even asking me to audition. They're like, we heard your voice, we heard your samples, we want you to do this book. And I was like, I'm starting. I was so excited. I was elated.
Okay, I've got to jump you forward now.
Okay.
Low point of your career.
There have been many. It's the low thing for me, and I don't mean that like I've been uniquely blessed as a narrator, because since I started narrating back in 2017, I have consistently had a book to do the entire time. Most of the time, and when I went to full time, I had multiple books, and I have been.
Why do you think that is? What do you think your secret is?
I don't know. I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that I learned a lot owning a construction company. And so it taught me how to market myself. It taught me how to run a small business. It taught me how to communicate effectively. I'm usually very, there was a personality test that I had taken. I can't remember, Clifton something. And it talked about one of my personality traits being woo, and WOO. And what that means is win others over. So I have this gift of being able to rally people to my side.
So do you have like a good work admin, regular reach outs, regular auditions?
Well, this is the thing. I used to, and I worked hard at getting, because I was getting, when I very first started, I was putting out auditions. And most people, when they're putting out auditions, would say they don't often get even a response sometimes. And occasionally they may get a response or whatever, if they're not getting the book. I was getting a response on almost everything that I was sending out. And the response was usually very positive. You were in my top 5. You were in my top 3. It was between you and another person. And I just love your voice and . But there's just something about the other person, or there's just a way that I don't know quite what it is, but you were so good, but there was just something more. And I'm like, what is it? Why am I always coming in like 2nd place, 3rd place, 5th? What's happening? And it wasn't until I realized, and I looked at the few books that some books that I was getting, and I was doing it part-time, so I couldn't do more stuff. Sean, when I first was talking to him, I says, I don't know what to do when I'm auditioning, because I don't want to audition for 5 books, get them all, and then I'm screwed for my schedule. And he laughed uproariously. He's like, the confidence that you have that you even think I might get all 5 of these auditions is astounding. And I'm like, but that was my concern. And so I don't know if it was just a mentality thing, or people would call it manifesting, or whatever it was, but I would get enough books that I was able to keep doing it. And I would do it in evenings and weekends after I worked. And so I had work, but there was always like, I needed to make sure I had a book coming up. And the books that I was getting, though, were written by non-Americans with an American setting. if that makes sense. So they were from Australia, they were from New Zealand, they were from the UK, but they were writing as if the
They were in
main character
America.
was in the US.
Yeah.
And so they loved it. But any of the books that were done for Americans by Americans, I was getting all of these, hey, top 2, top whatever, and I couldn't figure it out. And what I realized was that even though I'm from Western Canada, and we're told that we don't have as much of a heavy Canadian accent as you would hear over in the East Coast, or in
Yeah,
Ontario.
like honestly, I can't tell the difference, you guys. You sound exactly like me to me.
Well, I've worked at it now.
And I don't
They're like,
want to
oh yeah,
offend you or
okay. So today, if I was to try and do it like a more Canadian accent, you would hear it a
sound
bit
like
more,
you were
right?
from Minnesota or Michigan or that
And
state. where
that's
they-
the Western Canada, that's where we get it. So a lot of our news anchors are pulled into the Midwest. So I thought I just had to say sorry instead of sorry, and not say about and about, and out, and I would be fine. But there was a lot of other stuff that I was doing. And in my second or third book that I had done, I got a review that said, really love the narration, thought it was great, but his accent, I don't know where he's from, but I couldn't figure it out. And so what was happening, I realized, was my Canadian accent was showing through too much for the American authors that were putting these books out.
Yeah,
And so
can
I
see
worked with
that.
PJ Oakland to do my accent reduction. And then that facilitated the change of me. Now I was getting more books. So, but to answer your question, I felt like I'm putting myself out there on ACX to do the auditions for books that I think would be really good. But there's so many people that are going for those things. What I chose to do was go after the books that aren't being pursued that way. So I would go onto Amazon and I would look at books that came out in the last 30 days or the last 90 days in genres that I wanted to narrate in.
Yeah.
And then I would look and see, do they have something on Audible? I would check their social media to try and do my due diligence to see if they were the rights holder, see if they weren't the rights holder, see if they already had a book contract for audiobooks or whatever. And if I didn't see any of that, then I would send out an email letting them know why I was interested in the book, what was going on.
You built
and do
your
like these
career
cold
from
calls.
within.
Right.
And that gives you a great place of strength to work from. Okay, now I don't want to run out of time. And
Right.
This is very important. And because you're giving us so much wisdom in this answer anyway, because now you got to top that with final words of wisdom for the audience that's going to be watching this. And how are you going to top what you just said?
The thing that, so what I'll say is this, it'll tie it into what I said, into the words of wisdom, because what that facilitated for me was early success that carried forward, so that I didn't need to audition for any books. I haven't needed to audition for any books since 2018. I have always had work offered to me. Sometimes I've had people ask me to audition, but I haven't, or I've come across something I'm like, I really want to audition for that, and I'll audition, but I haven't had to audition. So I've had that success, and so that is rare. But what has happened or transpired for me is still the fear that ironically enough, you can be quote unquote successful to other people's purview, but in your own mind, you can still have that imposter syndrome. You can still have that person saying, no, you're still not good enough. You're still not like that other person. And you can be, what do they call it? Comparison is the death of progress. And so what I would suggest as a word of wisdom is to be okay with where you're at, to take a beat, pursue greatness, but not at the expense of yourself, not at the expense of your own mental health, and to allow yourself to be comfortable being as good as you are in that moment. I had a crisis of conscience here a little while ago that really put me in a dark spot, and I was really struggling to even make it into the booth to do the recording that I needed to do, and that was really hard. And people were like, "You have so many books, and you're asked to do so much stuff. Why would you even have that?" But it was just this internal fear, this internal, you're not good enough. You're not as good as you think you're going to be, or you can hear all of your flaws. I don't know why people even listen to you. All of that self-talk, that negative self-talk, can be really damaging. And what happened that changed something for me was I was listening to a book because I had to do a bundle system for an old series that I had done. And it was one of the first books that I had ever recorded. And I was listening back to it and cringing at how bad I was back then. And we have growth, we all grow. And so I knew objectively I had improved as a narrator from that point. And so now I know I'm better than I was then. And I was feeling horrible about myself as I am now. But I was looking at that book that I had done then and how bad it was by comparison to what I had done now. And yet that book sold thousands of copies.
Yeah. You have to talk yourself down.
Great reviews. And I'm like, people wanted to hear you when you sounded like that. And you're that much further past that.
PJ Auckland told me that when I had a crisis. I think I emailed him at 3 a.m. out of the clear blue sky. I've got to talk to you. I've got the worst failure in the entire world. And this was like 2 years ago. And he said to me, how many books have you done? And I think at the time it was 200. He said, so 200 people chose you.
Right.
200 people. And we're not even going to get into the people that said you were great that we know you don't listen to. 200 people chose you. Mm-hmm. And you're saying they're all stupid.
Right. And that's exactly it, right? Like, and it's weird how that internal voice can have so much more weight than the people around you going, what are you talking about? You're amazing. You get picked for this book, or you get done for that. And, you know, like, you're doing it. So just rest in that. And so
that's why we need to remind each other. You reminding them right here on this call.
And that's the thing that I would say, keep in the back of your head, is if I could be one more voice to add to the litany of voices that go, you're good enough.
Yeah.
Be okay with where you're at and just do the work, because you'll be there.
Brilliant. As always, Steve, you are a star. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you
Suzie,
for having me.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Suzie.
Here I am.
Something.
Okay,
Hi.
what was the first question? The first book. Oh, the first book I did.
How did you feel the minute you got that first book?
Well, I had done a few ACX books, and then I had seen a Dreamscape book coming up, and this was my first real publisher. And I looked at that book and I was like, oh, it takes place in Texas. My father-in-law has a very solid West Texas accent. So I was like, oh, I know how to do that. And I had, fooled around with it and stuff. So I sent John Holkelboer a note and I said, I see you've got this book coming up. And I've been told I have a good West Texas accent. And I got it. And then I went, oh no, I have. and there was, unbeknownst to me, it took place in Texas, but there were people from South Carolina and Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm like, oh no. I kind of freaked out. And I thought, oh, okay, calm down. You can do this. One voice at a time. You can do
First the excitement,
then
then
it was
headlines.
It was horror. Like, what have I done? But that was really fun. It ended up being, I had to just be so focused and do a lot of research and build these accents, and it was really fun, and it was a very lighthearted, cozy mystery. So there were fun elements to it. So that was great, and it was like,
okay, low moment.
Probably my low was about 5 years ago when I wasn't getting any books. It was like, it wasn't great periods of time. It wasn't months. It was, just I would get a book, I would finish the book. A couple of weeks would go by, I would get another book. It was just, I always had books, but it was, I couldn't plan on it,
All you need is that little thought in your head. I had that little thought at a bad time. What if nobody ever hires me again?
Well, it would have been a relief if they just said, just go, go into sweeping floors or something and stop thinking about it, because I was thinking too much about me. It was like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good. I can't do this. So, why don't I go do something else? Try oil painting for a change, do something else. And I actually had a narrator say, you're such a good painter. Why are you narrating? And I'm like, because I want to be a narrator.
Yeah. But what you said was so wise right there, because That's why I decided to do the Christmas video. I was thinking about me.
Yeah.
The
It's so
cure, the
totally
cure,
consuming. Yeah.
yeah, the cure is to, like, if you start doing something for someone else.
Yeah. And I talked to PJ about it too. Of course, he gives me, plenty of directions, but he also said, you have plenty of craft. You need to find people to work for. It's like, oh, he goes, you show up to all the classes and, you do them all and you just do a great job. So you need to, you got three legs on the stool. You're pretty heavy on one side. It was like, oh, you mean I send emails out to people? Oh, I
Yeah.
don't want to. I don't want to tell people they need me because
And it always comes down to it, doesn't it? And the thing
Oh.
about it is that sucks is
I know.
because you hear other people it happens to. They're like, well, I didn't do reach outs because I was really busy. So they're like, you have a really busy time and you don't audition, you actually turn a few jobs down. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, wait, hold on. And you're looking ahead.
Yeah.
And the answer to it is start doing reach outs. But when
I
you
know.
feel the lowest you've ever felt in your entire life,
I know.
the
I know,
last
and they're
thing you
like,
want to
and
do.
send them, tell people about your awards and all that. And
How
it's like,
great you are.
oh yeah, those. Oh yeah, those that I don't have because I don't have work.
Yeah. Ask me last week when I
Yeah,
was like
yeah.
the best narrator in the world.
And
That
you're like,
was-
okay, I can't really talk too much about what I did in July anymore because that's pretty old news.
It's the only job in the world where we are constantly so busy. We're lucky we get to brush our teeth and still unemployed. Literally
Yeah.
one book away from unemployment at all times.
Yes, it's
Okay,
like
so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So the highlight, because you obviously came swimmingly through the low light.
probably the highlight was a book, and I can't say that it's my favorite, like Tim said. It's not so much a favorite, but it affected me. It was a book I narrated with Dion Graham, and it was nonfiction, and my part was, Dion's it was about the refugee boys from Sudan coming to the United States.
Oh,
My part was the woman who, not supported, but she took care of, and find him jobs and, take him to Walmart and all that kind of stuff to get him settled. Sponsor. And Dion was he was the other author who wrote about this. So it was this parallel story. They would go to
wow.
Walmart and he would give his perspective. She would give her perspective. And it
I
was
love
just,
that kind of book.
it was so expansive because
Yeah.
you couldn't think about refugees in the same way again because it was
Yeah.
so raw. I mean, this boy walked through bloodied relatives.
Will you send me the title of it? I've got a very long queue of to be listened to, but I'd love to listen to that someday.
Okay. It
Yeah.
was lovely. And to talk to Dion in the parking lot while I was trying to, he would say things like, are you gonna give me an accent when you quote me? And I said, I don't know. What do you think? And he goes, let me think about it.
Did you?
He said, I think we would be respecting these boys if we didn't give them an accent. Because she would be saying to her neighbor, oh, he said this, and she would say it, but she wouldn't give him an accent.
Because it's her voice.
Yeah,
It's
she would
her
say, he
perception
said,
of him.
So
Yeah.
it was, his perspective was so respectful of not only the author, but of these people that were fragile people.
Oh, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was
I love that kind
real.
of
It was
thing.
an expanding kind of a book. It wasn't. Favorite is kind of like, I don't know, favorite. It's just, it was a very,
But that's a real type. But the thing is, that's a different type of favorite. Some books visit
Yeah.
us and they change us.
yeah.
And we want to be changed, don't we, by the
Yeah.
books?
It was a beautiful book. So
I love that. Okay. Suzie, you have the last word
the last word.
for the people that are watching this in 900 years.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate. because
Okay.
Steve has said, be happy with who you are, be content. Yes, yep, I am all over that. But I also have had reviews by like an audio file. I had a terrible review. And I might or might not be able to say something about that I used to review for audiophile. But anyway, I
Oh,
know
okay.
I know that these people aren't necessarily qualified to give an
Nobody's
educated, an
nobody's
experienced review.
But the thing is, at the end of the day, my opinion about reviews is it's their opinion. I don't care what
Right.
their education is. I don't
But
res
but
I
they're
don't
not
really
directors. They're not
no.
directors. They're just librarians. I mean, not just, I don't mean it that way, but it's like so my advice is that if you're a narrator and you're struggling, I think you should challenge yourself. Listen to people that you respect and you love how they narrate. Ask them if they would direct you or who they would recommend direct you. Not another narrator, not your friend or your neighbor, somebody who can challenge you. Because when I took several sessions with Paul Rubin, and he didn't give me any, oh, that's nice. I would go a sentence, he would go, wait a minute. It was,
Yeah.
but that's what I wanted. I wanted guardrails that would help me to drive down the road instead of getting stuck in sounding pretty. I know how to sound pretty. I can do it with stars. But
Yeah.
he was so good about saying, you're not telling me the story. I only hear you. Okay. So I really think being challenged to have someone listen to you, like looking in the mirror, if you have mustard all over your face and you look in the mirror and just walk away from it, you're not changing. Get in there, because we can all, it doesn't matter how long you've been a narrator, have someone listen to you who can give you accurate, wise feedback and grow. I mean, you can always get more connected. Always.
You see that striving that you're doing? I was struck. I'm trying not to think too much about it though, because I saw this thing on Threads last night. I don't like read posts, but it was one of those, I can't stand most narrators when they ruin the book for me kind of thing. And then like 400 authors chimed in on their comments about what narrators do wrong. And first I was surprised that authors who I think of as our compatriots, equally, the hard road to slog, always challenging yourself, always learning. I thought that they would understand, but
Yeah.
but what I took away from that thread, I shouldn't have been looking at that at like 3 a.m, and I didn't read any further, but what I took away from it is that, wow, how much I respect my fellow narrators, because there was a little bit of a line of ignorance in that.
Mhm.
A little bit of a line of, oh, well, don't like it, not my taste. And I think that's why they say we're such a strong community, is because every single one of us gets it, that cut in our soul, that every single one of us, we live on the edge, don't we? Of
But that's
that
a big
raw
reason why they
emotion.
don't have authors narrate their books very often, is because it's
Yeah.
a different skill set.
Yeah. And you have to be willing to go there. And I think because we're willing to go there, look at you. You're a veteran narrator. You've been narrating for years. You're well known for your work. And you're sitting here saying, push yourself, put
Mhm.
yourself out there, get uncomfortable. Every
It's
single one of
fun.
you has
It's
said
fun
that.
because you're
Yeah.
toppled off of your comfort zone, and
Yeah.
then they push you into something and you're like, oh, that felt so good. Rather
It's
than,
fun.
but that's scary.
Yeah.
That's scary.
But
It's more
it's
like,
part of the puzzle though, isn't it? Because you got
yeah.
to take care of the things that Tim and Steve talked about as well.
Yeah.
It's like a constant juggling thing, the mental health, the stamina, the braveness. What you three did here today, you stared down the barrel of a video camera that we've gone over, and I apologize if you had to be somewhere. It was just too fascinating. I couldn't bear to cut it off. But you both stared down the barrel of this camera, and you were raw and you were real, and you did exactly what good narrators do with
Thank
courage
you,
and
Daniela.
bravery. And that's, you've made me proud. You've undone the slightly nasty thoughts I had after reading that thread. And you've made me, I'm going to get teary now on my own call, but you've made me even more proud to be part of my fellow audiobook narrators. I can't think of another job aside from like paramedics or emergency line work, 'cause I'm not saying that what we do is on that level in that way, but it's quite brave what you guys do.
And
It's
you
quite
too.
brave.
You are too, Daniela.
I'm trying, but as you say, pushing myself. You guys are the best, and I enjoyed every second of this call, and I'm a different person right now than I was when we logged on. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you to the gorgeous studio audience. You guys, I'll send them the chat so they'll get to read all the lovely things you said, and I shall send you off all to have a wonderful night. Get ready for the holidays. Mwah! Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Daniela.
Bye.